NCR Corporation is a leader in omnichannel solutions, turning everyday interactions with businesses into exceptional experiences. With its software, hardware, and portfolio of services, NCR enables nearly 700 million transactions daily across financial, retail, hospitality, travel, telecom, and technology industries. NCR solutions run the everyday transactions that make your life easier. NCR is headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia, with about 30,000 employees and does business in 180 countries.
Good morning. I'm so excited to share my journey with you, my story, and a little bit of my work this morning, and hopefully give you a new perspective on something that's very near and dear to me. I feel that what we're going to talk about over the next half an hour is probably one of the biggest issues facing us as humans today. What used to nourish us and literally built us as a species, both biologically and culturally, is now destroying the planet, making us sick, and killing us. And that thing is food. Now, in order to have, I think, the right kind of discussion, or at least a discussion to me that's meaningful, I'd like to give you a little bit of a perspective on my journey to understand food the way that I look at it today. So for a few minutes, I'd like to talk about my path that led me here on this stage. I grew up in Monmouth County, New Jersey, a suburb of New York City, on a train line right directly to New York City. And the way that my parents raised me was different than the way that many of my friends were being raised in that environment. It was very important to my father to connect me to nature, to the outdoors. So he had me hunting, fishing, trapping, camping, hiking, exploring on a regular basis. And to do that where I lived it took quite an effort, and often meant us driving quite a distance. And at the same time, my mother had me outside gardening, looking at plants, and in the kitchen as much as possible. And the way that my parents raised me really helped guide my path in life. However, I grew up a really, really awkward kid. That's me on the right-hand side. And despite the bowl haircut and the glasses, which didn't help at all, I was quite a pudgy little kid. And I was very self-conscious about the way that I looked. And in fact, so much so that every time I walked past anything that gave me a reflection, a mirror, a store window, anything, I looked at it, sucked in my gut, and felt worse about myself. So my relationship with food at an early age was one that wasn't a very healthy relationship with food. I saw food as something that made me look bad and made me feel bad. But over time, I lost a little bit of weight. I started to think about, I started to find sports, and I started to learn as much as I could about nutrition. And from a very, very early age, this is my 8th grade yearbook, 8th grade, not even high school, 8th grade yearbook, where they take your picture and then they take the quote that you said the most that year, they put in that yearbook to remember forever. This is what I would say every day to everyone: you're putting too much salt on that food. So I've been giving nutritional advice well before I should be giving nutritional advice in my entire life. And again, the haircut, I can't get away from it. So through high school and then through college, I found athletics. And through athletics, I started to look at food through a different lens. I wrestled for high school. I wrestled for a Division I program at Ohio State, and even at a Division III program at the College of New Jersey. And through that journey, for a while, I didn't end up graduating in this, but I majored in nutrition. My parents and coaches hired nutritionists for me. I saw many doctors. I got a lot of nutritional advice from coaches, and started to learn as much as I could about at least what science was telling us at the time, and this is in the 90s, what we should be eating to be as healthy as possible. It didn't satisfy my need to learn as much as I could about food. In fact, I never felt more connected to food than when I was in the woods with my father or in the kitchen with my mother. And I realized there was something very special about those connections that I was making, because it went far beyond just my connection with food itself. I was connecting with my father. I was connecting with my mother. There were a personal relationship. I was connecting with my environment. I was connecting with the plants and the animals that I was eating. And I wanted to learn as much as I could about that connection and reconnect in ways that, that my ancestors had, but I never had the ability to do. It wasn't enough for me to just go hunting. I wanted to learn how to bow hunt, so I learned how to bow hunt. Then I wanted to learn how to make a bow. In fact, I thought if I should be hunting, I wanted to be a part of the entire process. So I learned how to make bows, and then I learned how to make arrows, and I would bow hunt with things that I made. Then I realized that I needed to learn how to make stone tips in order to make the arrows functional, and I wanted to learn how that could be done. And to answer the kinds of questions that I really wanted to know about, how to make these things the way people in the past did, how to use them the way people in the past did, I turned to archaeology. And the reason that I'm an archaeologist today is because I was trying to answer questions that were very important to my life. And here is a picture of me from several pictures from a few years ago. And this is traditional field archaeology, where you go out and you excavate into the ground and pull artifacts out of the ground in order to understand something about the people that made and used these artifacts. And this has been a wonderful path in my life, and I've learned a lot, and it's been very exciting. But it still wasn't enough. I wanted to learn more about how those things were made, because after all, what archaeologists do is we don't study the things to study the things. We study the things that come out of the ground to learn about the people that made and used them. And I wanted to learn how they were made and used. So I turned to a branch of archaeology called experimental archaeology. And experimental archaeology uses primitive technology, the skills that our ancestors used, to replicate these artifacts and to learn how they were made, how they were used, how they functioned. So I studied with some of the best primitive technologists around the world. I learned how to make stone tools and prehistoric ceramics, and how to butcher deer with stone tools and tan their hides using brains, animal brains. And I learned how to make all sorts of primitive fires and extract fibers from plants and tie them into nets and make baskets out of them. And for the sole purpose of trying to understand more about what's coming out of the ground. Because after all, when we pull artifacts out of the ground that are thousands of years old, we only find bits and pieces of tools. So experimental archaeology is a wonderful way to learn about what that, not only what that artifact was, but how it fit within a larger cultural system. And at the same time, as you can see here, I became a father, and I was raising a family. And this is all very important in my journey with food, as you'll see in just a few minutes. This is a picture of us at my favorite archaeological open-air museum in the world in Lyra in Denmark, where we were living in a Stone Age village for a period of time, really, for a week with students. And then I realized that all of these things that I was learning was not only helping my path and my connection with the world around me, but I wanted to share it with others. So I became a professor. Now this is a picture from the Atlantic from several years ago, and I think they did a great job with everything but the ears and the chin. But other than that, it's a great picture, and I was dubbed the Professor Caveman in this article. And what it was really speaking to was the idea that I thought one of the best ways to teach was not just in the classroom, but to get my students outside and learning by doing. And we call it soul authorship, that where the project-based learning they were engaged in was all the projects were from start to finish. If we were going to learn how to make clay pots, they were digging clay out of the ground, finding where that clay was from, all the way through to firing the pots in an outdoor fire. If we were learning about stone tools, it wasn't enough just to find the stones and make the tools, but then we would go out and apply what they've learned, and we would butcher deer and process all sorts of other things with it. And it's an incredible way to teach, and it's an incredible way to learn. And then several years ago, I had a life-changing experience that solidified in my mind all the things that I was doing and learning for decades about ancient technology, my ancestors, our ancestors, and also food. And it was this program called The Great Human Race, where myself and my co-star Kat Bigney were put into 10 different situations. The idea was that we were going to follow the path of our ancestors beginning at 2.5 million years ago in Tanzania, and we were going to live for a period of time, usually about 8 days at a time, in each location, beginning in Africa, making our way up through Africa, through the Middle East, through Asia, and ending, believe it or not, in Oregon at 4,000 years ago. And at each one of these locations, they were selected because something important happened in our evolutionary past at that time. A new technology was developed or a new way of doing things that made a difference in our past. And my job was to replicate the technologies from that time period. And we were supposed to live in each of these places using only those technologies for all the things that we needed to do, to get our food, to make our shelter, to protect ourselves. And this was a fascinating experience. And I'll say a few more words about it in a moment, but let me show you a 30-second sort of trailer for that program.
National Geographic Channel presents an experiment millions of years in the making.
I don't know how we're gonna get through this.
Two experts on a global journey, armed only with the tools of each human species.
I only have a rock and a stick.
If we had to go back to how it all started,
We're in the same spot that our ancestors were.
could mankind survive again?
Oh my God. Stand your ground.
The Great Human Race. The evolution begins next Monday at 10. On
So this program gave me and Kat the opportunity to do something that no other human ever in the history of the world has done. We lived for a period of time each of the major evolutionary periods of our past. Now, it was only about 8 days at a time, but it was long enough to be hungry. It was long enough to be scared. It was long enough to begin to feel what the diets that our ancestors ate really felt like and how it impacted our bodies. And as an archaeologist, an experimental archaeologist, it really was enough time to show me how efficient these tools were and what they were really used for. And you can see some of the locations there on the screen that we were at, but it was a life-changing experience. And what I realized was that our ancestors really figured out something incredibly cool, and the role that technology played in our dietary past. And I was fairly well grounded in our ancestral technologies. I was fairly well grounded in hunting. I was fairly well grounded in preparing food like our ancestors did. But I really thought there was a really incredible takeaway message from everything that I had been experiencing and conducting research on for my entire life. But I needed that extra step. In order to make it realistic today, these lessons from our past today, I needed to learn the modern kitchen skills from people that are doing wonderful things in the kitchen still today. So I turned my focus after that program to being trained as much as I could towards becoming a chef. And I trained at the Italian Culinary Institute in Calabria. I trained at the School of Artisan Food in England and worked with some incredible people around the world. And then most recently, last year, my family and I were I was on sabbatical, and I took my family with me. We were based out of Ireland, but spent our year in 13 different countries, living with and working with indigenous and traditional groups all over the world. And also coming back and again working with some top star Michelin chefs and trying to figure out how we can balance our dietary, amazing lessons from our dietary past with amazing things that are happening in the kitchen today to really address this issue of food and human diet and health. Most recently, I came back and launched in November the Eastern Shore Food Lab at Washington College. And if anybody's interested, I'd be happy to talk to you after this. And there's information spread out on all the tables outside about this unique program. But the idea here is that my students and I and my team are focused on understanding and documenting as much as we can from our dietary past, from our varied dietary present around the world, and working to take these lessons again and combine them with wonderful things that people are doing in modern kitchens around the world to really address this issue of food and diet and health. So, with that background, I'd like to spend the rest of my time here letting you see through my eyes, through a different lens, the way that I look at this issue with food and diet and health. And hopefully I can explain it to you in a way that makes you look at it in a way you've never looked at it before. So let me start off with two questions. What foods are we as humans designed to eat? And what foods are we designed to digest? Designed to obtain, and what are we designed to digest? Now, we go to the store and get food that's already been prepared for us. We have minimal processing at home. We buy food at the restaurants that are ready for us. But if we think about it at its very root, what foods are we designed to obtain and what foods are we designed to digest? In other words, if I took any one of you and put you outside with no clothes, no tools, no anything, how would you survive? What can your body allow you to have access to in terms of nutrition? Now, think about it for a minute. I love being human. I mean, it's a statement that probably nobody's ever said before, but I do. But there are a lot of drawbacks to being human. One of the drawbacks, when our ancestors stood upright, immediately we inherited back problems. We do. We have back problems because we walk on two legs. Because we're human, the female members of our species, and I'm sorry, have the most dangerous and painful childbirth of any animal on the planet. But there's other drawbacks to being human. Compared to other animals, we are biologically one of the weakest species on the planet. We have members of our species that are incredibly strong, incredibly fast, can jump very high. But as a species, compared to other animals, we don't have a whole lot going for us biologically. We're not that strong. We're not that fast. Our nails are practically useless. Our teeth don't do a whole lot. We can't climb very well. We can't fly. We can't jump very high. We can't even swim very fast or dig into the ground without a tool. So our ability to get food is really compromised. We have an incredibly difficult time getting resources directly from our environment with no technologies whatsoever. Prior to technology, and this right here is the earliest technology we have evidence from. This is a stone tool that was created 3.3 million years ago in Kenya. It was only found, this is a resin cast of it, but it was only found a few years ago. Prior to this tool being created, everything we did with our environment, every way we interact with our environment was limited to what our bodies had. These incredibly weak muscles, weak teeth, and weak nails. So what can we eat? What can we extract from our environment using only our bodies? Well, exactly what our ancestors prior to 3.5 million years ago ate. A few plants and some insects. Now, insects are a nutrient-dense food. Plants, even though they have a lot going for them, are not. And as a result of it, our bodies and our brains were very small. But for as difficult as it is for us to get food from our environment, we have an incredibly inefficient digestive tract and have an even harder time transforming those resources into something from which our body can derive nutrition. So even when we can get resources from our environment, our ability to get nutrition from those resources is really compromised. Our guts are 60% the size of what would be expected from a similar-sized primate. But we have this, and we've been using it for millions of years to overcome our physical limitations and interact with our environment. This is the triumph of our dietary past. These are some examples of the tools that our ancestors created that allowed us to access nutrients from our environment and transform those nutrients into something that our body can do something with. Digging sticks, stone tools, fire, ability to hunt at a distance, grinding things like grains. Now, what does that have to do with us today? The triumph of our dietary past is creating technologies and behavior patterns that allow us to overcome our physical limitations and extract the most nutrient-dense resources from our environment, and most importantly, transforming those resources into the most bioavailable foods on the planet. We're overcoming our limitations by getting incredible food that our bodies have no business eating and transforming it into something that our bodies are relying on. That's an incredible story. And if I ended the story right here, we should pat ourselves on the back and feel very proud of our ancestors. But that's not the end of the story, this is. Well, this is the current status of the story. The failure of our modern food system is that it produces such nutrient-free food that for the first time ever in the history of the planet, we have done the impossible. We have created obesity and malnutrition in the same individual. That's what the modern food system has created for us. That is practically impossible. So I want to give a few examples of that, real-world examples of what I'm talking about. The modern food system is taking nutrients from our environment and literally stripping nutrients from those foods before they go into your mouths. The exact opposite of what our 3.5 million-year-old dietary past was like. So for example, grains are stripped of their most nutritious parts. We only really eat the endosperm, the starch, and cooked in ways that don't make them safe or nutritionally available to our bodies. Long fermented sourdough breads are one of the few ways to take that fermentation process, to take a grain and transform it into something that our bodies can actually safely utilize the maximum amount of nutrition from those grains. But instead, what do? We strip off all the good parts of the grain and make bread. You know, the average sandwich bread takes less than an hour to make, from Flour to literally in the package, less than an hour. Meanwhile, a long fermented sourdough bread can take a day and a half, and during that time, a whole bunch of chemical transformations take place. Milk is another great example. We have been drinking as humans, as human adults, milk from other animals for at least 10,000 years, making cheese for at least 8,000 and making butter for at least 6. Today, milk is stripped of all of its nutrients, pasteurized, homogenized, and then reassembled at the minimum levels to make that milk legal to be called whatever it is. All the rest that has been stripped off is sold for profits for the dairy industry. Animals. Animals are slaughtered and butchered, and only half of the animal by weight makes it on the grocery store shelves. From an ethical level, from a sustainability level, and from a nutrition level, that's incredibly inefficient and incredibly horrible. That half of that animal that doesn't make it to market represents more than half of the nutrition that that animal could provide us. So there are things that we can do. And I believe that looking into the past to see how our ancestors built us. Our species is 300,000 years old. And our species was built, founded on a diet, the only diet that could support us. To see how that happened creates an incredible foundation for us to move forward and really make significant changes. So I'll end with this. The way that we as humans deal with food is uniquely human. No other animal on the planet deals with it the way that we do. And everything that we are biologically and culturally is wrapped up in the way that we deal with food. In fact, so much so that I would suggest that every time that you take a bite of food, you are conveying messages to the world, information about you. Your religion, your politics, your socioeconomic status, your orientation, your community, your mood is conveyed every time you make a decision to take a bite of food or feed your family or make a decision about what you buy at the grocery store. And if that's true, the failure of the modern food system is failing more than just our diets. It's failing us as humans as well. So by addressing this, we can begin to address all of those other things that are happening in our world as well. So here is my charge to you. My charge is find ways to connect with your food in real and meaningful ways. And by doing so, I promise you will connect with your health, your environment, your community, your family, and even yourselves in ways you could have never imagined. It is time to eat like humans again. Thank you.